promoting abortion. The Biden administration continues its plans to salvage Roe v. Wade. We're at the White House. Aid for Nigeria. A European nation's gift tells massacre victims you are not forgotten. Daily routines. Pope Francis has advice for the faithful on guarding against worry and anxiety. And protecting the unborn. How pro-lifers in one European country are marching forward in the fight for life. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, July 19th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. More than a dozen Democratic members of Congress were among those arrested this afternoon following an abortion rights protest at the Supreme Court. They marched to the nation's highest court from Capitol Hill while wearing green bandanas with the phrase, "Won't back down." Nearly 36 people were arrested for blocking traffic. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops rebukes the so-called Women's Health Protection Act, which the Biden administration fully supports. The USCCB says the legislation would impose abortion on demand nationwide at any stage of pregnancy and would eliminate pro-life laws at every level of government. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, weeks after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, the Biden administration is pressing forward with its abortion agenda. But the bishops object, writing, quote, "Deliberately ending the lives of defenseless and voiceless human beings is the antithesis of health care."
In New Jersey, Vice President Kamala Harris gives a speech at the 113th NAACP National Convention.
We know, NAACP, that our country has a history of claiming ownership over human bodies.
And she claims
extremist so-called leaders are criminalizing doctors and punishing women for making health care decisions for themselves.
But the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, in a letter published Monday, writes, "We implore those who see abortion as a legitimate solution to the needs of women to abandon this path of death and despair." And as the Biden administration demands what they call reproductive rights, Archbishop William Lori of Baltimore and Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York also urge in their pro-life letter, "We exhort our nation to prioritize the well-being of women, children, and families with both material resources and personal accompaniment so that no woman ever feels forced to choose between her future and the life of her child." Both the president and vice president had no on-camera events listed on their public schedules today, but the president and first lady Jill Biden offered their support to the war-torn nation of Ukraine by welcoming that country's first lady, Olena Zelenska, to the White House this afternoon. The two first ladies previously met in Europe and promised to stay in touch about the ongoing needs of the people in Ukraine. Just last night, Ukrainian firefighters battled a blaze in the Odessa region, officials there say, after Russia fired cruise missiles from the Black Sea.
Also today, we learned in the White House press briefing room that Russia is, quote, laying the groundwork to annex Ukrainian territory that it controls in direct violation of Ukraine's sovereignty. That's according to National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby. Meanwhile, he also says the U.S. will continue to provide Ukraine with security assistance, including weapons and equipment. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
And joining us now is Mike Davis, founder and president of the Internet Accountability Project. Mike, welcome back. Always great to be with you. A lot to get to today, but first, as we heard from Owen, the House passed the Women's Health Protection Act, as well as a bill to protect women who cross state lines for abortions. I'd like to get your reaction and what you think this all signals.
Well, I mean, I think it shows that Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry has a lot of control over the Democrat Party. The abortion industry makes its money off of killing unborn babies, and it gives its proceeds to Democrat campaigns and causes. And before, you had 5 left-wing judges on the Supreme Court for 49 years coddling the abortion industry, and that just ended. So they need to find new ways to coddle the abortion industry. The abortion industry is telling these Democrat politicians in D.C. to jump, and their response is, how high?
Yeah, and Mike, there's also a push by Democrats to codify same-sex marriage with the Respect for Marriage Act, which would, in part, consider marriage valid under federal law if it was legal in the state where the people were married. It would also repeal the Defense of Marriage Act, which was signed into law by President Bill Clinton, a Democrat, of course. Your thoughts?
This is purely a scare tactic by the abortion industry. The abortion industry knows that there's not support for abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. And so what they're trying to do is bring in these straw man arguments like gay marriage. There are not 5 votes on the Supreme Court to overturn Obergefell.
Yeah, and speaking of the court, in the wake of the Dobbs decision, pro-abortion advocates, they've really been very vocal about their disapproval of the justices. In fact, as we mentioned, just today, more than a dozen House Democrats were arrested at a pro-abortion rally protesting the Supreme Court's decision. That said, let's talk about this backlash that the justices are facing and also the importance of lifetime appointments and protected pay.
Yeah, under our Constitution, federal judges, including Supreme Court justices, don't run for office. They're appointed. They're appointed for life, so they don't have to worry about their next job, and they're pay protected, so they don't have to worry about Congress cutting their pay if they make an unpopular decision. The founders intended for the federal judiciary to be unpopular. That's why it put these protections in the Constitution. Just think, Brown versus Board of Education, when it was decided more than 50 years ago, was not popular, but they did the right thing.
Yeah, I want to switch gears here, Mike. I want to talk now about the American Innovation and Choice Online Act. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how this bill can protect freedom online? I understand it's going up for a vote soon.
Yeah, so the trillion-dollar big tech monopolists, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, have too much power in this country, and they use that power to crush competition, shutter small businesses, and cancel conservatives and others with whom that they disagree. What this bill does, S2992, is it finally breaks up big tech's gatekeeping power over information and commerce. They have too much power, and there is a rare closing bipartisan window of opportunity this summer to finally do something about this. And Republicans and Democrats need to come together and finally do something about this. The time for talk is over. It's time to actually do something.
Yeah, speaking of big tech, as we all know, Twitter is suing Elon Musk over his revoked $44 billion bid to buy the platform. And now it looks like the case will be going to trial in October. How do you see this all playing out?
Well, I think Elon Musk is a good person for trying to do what he tried to do. Obviously, Twitter, he thought Twitter was misrepresenting the value of its company. But besides all this, we should not have to rely on a benevolent billionaire like Elon Musk to enjoy free speech rights online in this country. This is why we must break up big tech. Google owns YouTube. Facebook owns Instagram and WhatsApp. They have too much control. We saw when Parler tried to compete against Twitter, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple colluded to kill Parler, kick it out of the App Store duopoly, and kick it off the internet. We have to break up big tech if we want free speech online.
And we are running out of time, Mike, but before I let you go, curious what else you're following.
There's a lot going on in Washington, D.C. right now. I think that the Attorney General needs to be held accountable for allowing these intimidation campaigns at Supreme Court justices' homes. They're facing death threats, being removed from their homes. Justice Kavanaugh and his family faced an assassination attempt. This amnesty by the Attorney General, this is unacceptable, and House Republicans should impeach him in January when they take control.
All right, we're going to leave it right there, Mike. Thanks so much for your analysis. Always appreciate it.
Thank you.
A judge in West Virginia has temporarily blocked the state's 150-year-old ban on abortion. The ruling sided with an abortion clinic's claim that the state has other conflicting laws. The Attorney General says he will appeal. And in Mississippi, the state's last abortion clinic is closed. The owner of Jackson Women's Health Organization has sold the building and will not reopen, instead planning to relocate to New Mexico. The abortion provider lost the Supreme Court case which overturned Roe v. Wade. On Capitol Hill, partisan battle lines are forming over the latest economic package from the White House. Catholic Democrat Joe Manchin is blocking the parts of the measure to address the climate, and that drew the ire of many of his colleagues. Vermont's Bernie Sanders tweeted, quote, "Joe Manchin is someone who is a major recipient of fossil fuel contributions. He has taken campaign contributions from 25 Republican billionaires. Is he interested in representing the interests of working class people in this country? I don't think he is." Republicans disagree. Senator John Cornyn says paring down the reconciliation bill and removing new taxes was essential for GOP support on another measure, a $52 billion plan providing subsidies and tax breaks for companies to produce microchips. The Texas Republican calls it critical for national security.
It's one thing to be aware of a supply chain for things like toys or consumer items, but it's another to be dependent on a supply chain, a foreign supply chain, for something that's critical to our way of life and our economy and our national security is advanced semiconductors.
The Senate is also expected to work on several abortion-related bills before the August recess, but they don't have the votes to pass. Democrats say they want to keep abortion in the public eye heading into the November midterm elections. But Republicans tell EWTN News Nightly that strategy is meant to deflect attention from the failure of the Biden administration policies. China is vowing a response of strong measures if Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi makes good on her reported plans to travel to Taiwan next month.
一个中国原则和中美3个联合公报规定。
A foreign ministry spokesman claims that a visit by the House Speaker would undermine Beijing. The communist government also wants the U.S. to cancel a recent multi-million-dollar arms deal with Taiwan. China continues to conduct military drills near the island. Two Catholic priests have been kidnapped in Nigeria. Father John Mark on the left and Father Donatus were taken last Friday from their rectory. Their diocese is asking for prayers for their safe return. Aid to the Church in Need reports that 20 Catholic priests have been taken captive just this year in the country's northern state. 3 have been killed. Meanwhile, a diocese in Nigeria recently received a donation of nearly $30,000 from the government of Croatia. The money is in response to the deadly attack during Catholic Mass in Nigeria last month. Local church leaders say the money will help the 17 people who remain hospitalized in critical condition. And in India, protesters are taking to the streets as the country's currency falls to a record low. Demonstrators also called attention to increased food and gas prices. Some were detained by military police. India's central bank has recently raised its interest rate by 0.5%. At the same time, the rupee has fallen to a record low against the U.S. dollar. Coming up, taking a closer look at the dangers of transgender procedures. University of Pennsylvania has nominated Lia Thomas, a transgender swimmer, for the NCAA Woman of the Year award. Thomas, a biological male who identifies as a woman, came under fire in recent months after winning the women's Division I national championship in the 500-yard freestyle. And joining us now to discuss is Dr. Grazie Christie, Senior Policy Advisor for the Catholic Association. Dr. Christie, great to have you on as always. A lot to talk about, but first, I want to get your thoughts on Penn nominating Lia Thomas for this award and what you think it says to biological females.
Well, it's a piece with what's been going on at Penn and other places like that. My son just graduated from Penn, actually, and that was very annoying to me. But what they're trying to do is pretend that biological males and biological females can compete physically on the same level playing field, and that's absolutely untrue. You don't have to have an MD like I do or be a biologist to understand that. All you have to see is the differences in male and female physique and understand that men perform at higher levels than women when it comes to physical contests. And this is totally normal, and these are sex-related changes related to our DNA and to our development during puberty and to our hormones. So what Penn is trying to do is pull the wool over our eyes and tell us that this man who identifies as a woman is the woman competitor of the year. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, switching gears, I want to talk about something else. A study published in medical journal Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience. Well, it found that it's kind of unclear if gender-affirming hormones can have long-term effects on cognition. Can you speak a little bit more about the dangers associated with giving children these hormones when we're not even sure of the long-term effects?
Well, this was a really interesting study. There's a huge study that examined a lot of different smaller studies about what is the effect of estrogen and other gender hormones or sex hormones on cognition and Alzheimer's disease, on the development of Alzheimer's disease. And it found that estrogen tends to be protecting women from developing Alzheimer's disease at the same rate that they would if they had less estrogen on board. In the study, they acknowledge that transgender people who are given anti-estrogen hormones, they run the same risks, but no studies have been done. So what we're finding out, even from this study that doesn't speak against transgender therapies, is that what's being done to children who are put on girls who are put on puberty blockers is really an experiment, because there are no studies to tell us if these girls are going to grow up to have Alzheimer's early. And so this is just one more layer of unethical treatment of girls and boys with gender dysphoria.
And what about the impact on fertility, especially as doctors begin, treating teenagers and even children?
Well, what's really sad is that many young people, especially those who present before puberty, are losing their fertility. Sometimes it's because they have hysterectomies and oophorectomies if they're girls. If they're boys or men, they might have orchiectomies, which is a castration. Otherwise, they also receive hormones which take away their ability to ovulate if they're women and to produce sperm if they're men. So what happens is they end up infertile. And this is a terrible thing. If anybody who's watching has had infertility or someone in their family with infertility, this is a very big burden to carry around. And the medical profession is just going around and granting people infertility. This is a very bad thing.
Yeah, and I find it really interesting because over in Europe, Sweden actually stopped giving cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers to those under the age of 16. They did that last year because of their studies and the dangers that they pose. Do you think other countries will follow suit? And why do you think we're not following their lead?
Well, it's very important to note that children cannot consent to these treatments because they are simply unable to consent. Cognitively, they can't understand these future consequences. They're not able to consent to these. So this is really unethical. Parents are consenting for them, or the state is consenting for them. So later on, they're growing up and turning around and saying, how could you do this to me? I am now sexually dysfunctional. I'm incontinent. I'm infertile. These are all things that I couldn't have said yes to. So Sweden is doing the right thing. Other European countries are doing the right thing. The United States ought to, but we're very much in the grip of this sexual liberation ideology that has completely embraced transgender ideology, even to the extent of making our children infertile and dysfunctional.
Yeah, I want to switch gears. I'd love to talk more about that, but we're running out of time. Something else I do want to touch on with you, though. The Biden administration is instructing healthcare providers to perform abortions in case of emergencies, regardless of state laws. I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
I read that directive very carefully. It's actually a solution in search of a problem, because what it's directing doctors to do is directing them to do what they're already doing. So even a very pro-life physician operating in a very pro-life state would always save the life of a mother in the case of miscarriage, for instance, an inevitable miscarriage. If she needed a DNC, the patient gets a DNC. The mother's life is not in danger. This is how responsible physicians have always acted. So I would say there's nothing wrong with the directive. It's asking doctors to do what they would normally do.
Okay, and before I let you go, any final thoughts?
On the transgender issue, I hope that things are turning around. I like that people are concentrating on how damaging it is to children, because it does highlight that transgender ideology is really, unscientific and experimental, and we need to start as a society pushing back.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're talking about it. Thank you so much, Dr. Christie. Always appreciate it.
Thanks.
Up next, pro-lifers in one European nation keep up their march to protect the unborn. new policy says Vatican investments cannot contradict church teaching. The Holy See released the measure earlier today. It makes specific reference to the sanctity of life and the dignity of the human being. The guidelines also exclude investments designed to be speculative in nature. Pope Francis calls on the faithful to listen to the word of God before jumping into busy daily routines.
E sono sempre vicino anche alla martoriata popolazione ucraina.
During his Sunday address at the Vatican, the Holy Father says reading Scripture guards against worry and anxiety and keeps us close to God throughout our activities. His message drew from Luke's Gospel about our Lord's visit to Martha and Mary. Pope Francis says that the better part, which Mary chose, is, quote, listening to the words of Christ. Well, finally tonight, abortion remains in the news in the United States amid the overturning of Roe v. Wade and pushback from the White House. But the fight for the unborn is also taking place in Europe. EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Andreas Thonhauser talks to the president of Italy's March for Life.
You are one of the leading pro-life advocates here in Rome, here in Italy as well, and you have been organizing the March for Life for more than a decade now. How do you perceive the situation of the pro-life movement and the right to life, especially for the unborn here in Italy?
Well, yes, it has been an interesting moment in the last 10 years because from the very beginning, when our law on abortion was voted in 1978, many things have changed, I would say, in the last period, because for more than 30 years, nothing has been done on the public square, on the public opinion, on the Italian public opinion. But now, having seen, because when we started the March for Life, the decision was taken after seeing how the great result that had the American March for Life. So with the March for Life, in fact, the situation in Italy has changed, and the public opinion is now aware of what abortion is and the numbers that we have, because we have more than 6 million babies killed in Italy in the 40 years that we had abortion. And so now people are reacting, and especially young people are reacting.
And how do you see the role of the Vatican when it comes to the pro-life movement?
Well, I would say that all the popes that we had have been very clear on abortion. Of course, we have to remember the Evangelium Vitae with John Paul II, but nevertheless also the last popes, Benedict XVI and Pope Francis, have been very clear on abortion and very strong statements against abortion. So I think that on this side, the Vatican has been very clear. There is, I would say, perhaps less reaction from the bishop's side, so on the Italian Bishops' Conference. We have a few exceptions, but normally they don't like to speak very much, I would say not against abortion in itself, but against the law, which is, of course, for us Italians very important, because we have to focus against the law, which is something that kills the babies.
And Italy is usually considered as a family-friendly country. However, it has one of the lowest birth rates here in Europe. Do you see a change there? Do you see maybe life is being more welcome in the future?
Well, this is a long-term issue, I think. It's true that Italy has changed so much in a century, because if we think that at the beginning of the 20th century, every woman had 5 children as an average, and now we are, the last numbers were 1.25, not even 1.3. So I think it's one of the less in Europe. So even less than Spain. So I think this is a real drama, and we, of course, think that we should very much focus on defense of the family, and especially on our politicians in order to help families. Italy loves families, is based on families. So there will be a turning point, but we need a lot of work to do.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.